welcome to the debate. 3 years. That was the magic number in the early 1990s. If you had a business idea, the average time between having that idea and actually seeing software running in production was 3 years. In the tech world, that's a geological epic. I mean, it's the difference between the iPhone 1 and the iPhone 4. So today we're looking at the revolution that supposedly fixed all that, Agile, and asking a very uncomfortable question. Have we swung too far?
Or, to put a finer point on it, have we traded a system where we knew exactly when we'd be late for a system where we have absolutely no idea when we'll finish?
Well, that is a bleak way to start, but I appreciate the candor. We are debating the tension between agile software development, which has been the dominant philosophy for 20 years, and the predictive discipline of fast time to market, or FTTM. The central question isn't just which is better. It's whether modern Agile has become a kind of cult of tools that has lost the ability to answer the single most important question a stakeholder has, which is, when is the release date?
And before the Agile purists come for me, I'm not arguing for a return to the Stone Age. I lived through the 90s. I remember the pain. But what I am arguing is that in our obsession with flexibility, we've lost the concept of the critical path. We're busy, we're sprinting, we have colorful sticky notes everywhere. But are we actually moving toward a finish line? Or are we just churning?
Well, let's look at why we started sprinting in the first place. You can't understand the almost religious fervor around Agile without understanding the trauma of the application delivery lag. In the 90s, the standard was the waterfall method. You'd spend, 6 months gathering requirements, another 6 months designing, a year building, 6 months testing.
And by the time you launched, the market's moved on, the competitor is launched, and nobody wants the product.
Exactly. It was a complete disaster. In aerospace and defense, you saw 20-year cycles. 20 years. You'd start building a fighter jet software, and by the time it was deployed, the computer chips were museum pieces. The frustration was just boiling over. And that's the context for the Snowboard 17.
The famous ski trip?
Right. February 2001, 17 software developers met at the Snowbird Ski Resort in Utah. It sounds like the setup to a joke. John Kern and Kent Back walk into a lodge, but they wrote the Agile Manifesto. And it wasn't just a process change. It was a cultural rebellion. They just flipped the script. Individuals and interactions over processes and tools, responding to change over following a plan.
I don't dispute the rebellion was necessary. I mean, the phase gate model, where you literally couldn't write a single line of code until a 400-page requirement document was signed in blood, that was strangling innovation. But here's my issue. While the Snowbird 17 were out skiing, there was a parallel study happening in Silicon Valley by a group called Lateral Works. And they were studying teams that were already moving fast, teams hitting market windows that seemed impossible.
And this is the origin of FTTM?
Yes, fast time to market. And what they found was fascinating. These fast teams were doing a lot of what Agile advocates, empowering teams, iterating with customers, removing bureaucratic waste. But they did one thing that Agile explicitly deprioritized. They maintained a rigorous, calculated schedule. They respected the physics of time.
Physics is an interesting word choice for software. Software is malleable. It's thought stuff. It's not like pouring concrete. If I build a wall in the wrong place on a construction site, I have to sledgehammer it down. If I write a class in the wrong place in Java, I just refactor it.
See, that is the trap. That is the exact mindset that leads to what I call the cult of tools. We think because code is easy to change, that time is easy to change, but it's not. FTM treats a project like a chain of dependencies. Task A must happen before task B can start. If task A is late, task B is late. That's physics. It doesn't matter if it's code or concrete. If the database schema isn't done, the API team is blocked. Modern Agile tools, your Jira, your Trello, whatever you use, they largely ignore this reality.
I'd say they don't ignore it, they just handle it differently. They break work into sprints, usually 2-week cycles. You commit to a chunk of work, you finish it, you demonstrate value. It's empirical. You measure progress by working software, not by some Gantt chart on a wall that says you're 45% complete with analysis. I would much rather have a feature that works today than a plan that promises a feature in 6 months.
But working software doesn't tell me when the whole product will be done. Here is the mechanism of failure I see constantly. You have a bucket of time, a sprint. You fill it with features. You don't finish them all. So what happens?
They roll over to the next sprint. That's the nature of empirical process control. You learn your velocity over time.
They roll over. Exactly. The bubble of work moves to the right. But because you are only looking at the next 2 weeks, nobody calculates the knock-on effect. Does that rollover push the final launch date by 2 days, or does it push it by 2 months? Because that feature was a prerequisite for the marketing launch and the regulatory audit and the training manual.
You're describing what FTTM calls the gap.
Precisely. The gap. This is a critical concept for our listeners. The gap is the difference between the target date the business needs the product, say to beat a competitor or hit the Christmas holiday season, and the date the project is actually tracking toward based on reality. Agile tools are terrible at showing you the gap until it's way too late. You just keep rolling cards over, sprint after sprint, until suddenly it's November and you realize you aren't launching until March.
I think you're conflating Agile with bad management, though. The manifesto says responding to change over following a plan. It doesn't say don't have a plan. The best Agile teams I know have roadmaps. They have release plans.
The manifesto implies a plan exists. But the industry implementation, the software vendors, the consultants, they sell a version of Agile that is frankly lobotomized. It has no frontal cortex. It has no long-term planning capability. It's just fill the bucket, empty the bucket, repeat. And the vendors love it because they sell you seats on a tool that tracks activity, not outcome.
Okay, but let's play devil's advocate here. If we reintroduce this critical path, this rigid linking of tasks, aren't we just rebuilding the prison? The whole reason Agile took over and 71% of companies use it now is because it allows for discovery. If I'm building a new AI tool, I don't know what the critical path is for the next 6 months because I don't even know if the technology works yet. If I try to map out every single dependency for a year, I'm just engaging in fantasy.
That is a valid point for pure R&D. If you were literally inventing a new material or a new algorithm, sure, iterate away. But most companies aren't doing pure R&D. They are doing product development. They are trying to ship a platform update by Q3. And this is where the demonization of waterfall really hurts us. We need to distinguish between 2 types of waterfall.
Go on. This distinction seems pretty central to your argument.
It is. There is waterfall as bureaucracy. That's the phase gate stuff. Stop everything until the steering committee approves the design document. That's bad. We agree. That kills speed. But then there is waterfall as a schedule of dependencies. That is simply acknowledging that you can't put the roof on until you build the walls. FTM says, keep the agile culture, keep the sprints, keep the customer feedback, but map those sprints onto a dependency chart so you can see the future.
So you want to embed agility inside a structured timeline.
I want to know the truth. Without a linked schedule, you're lying to yourself about the finish date. Look at history. We talk about Agile like it invented speed, but look at the Empire State Building. How long did that take to build?
Oh, it was incredibly fast. I recall reading it was something like a year and a half.
1 year and 45 days, from breaking ground to opening the doors. The Golden Gate Bridge, under 4 years. These were massive, complex engineering feats involving thousands of workers, supply chains, steel, concrete, wind physics. They didn't use Jira. They didn't use sprints. They used a relentless focus on the critical path. They knew every single day which task was driving the end date.
Okay, but those were singular visions. The Empire State Building had a clear blueprint. The laws of physics don't change halfway through the second floor. Modern software is messy. Users change their minds. Competitors launch features that force us to pivot. And frankly, the skunkworks model, putting elite engineers in a room and locking the door, that doesn't scale. Agile democratized development. It allowed HR departments, marketing teams, massive retail organizations to adopt these principles. You can't run a 5,000-person IT department like a 1930s construction site.
But you can't run it like a kindergarten finger painting class either, where everyone just does what they feel like for 2 weeks. Mass adoption of a flawed process isn't a victory, it's a pandemic of inefficiency. You mentioned democratization, but what I see is a loss of engineering discipline.
We've replaced chief engineers who understood the whole system with scrum masters who just facilitate meetings.
That's a bit harsh. The role of the Scrum Master is to remove impediments, not just book rooms.
But do they remove the impediment of time? Look at the data. You mentioned 71% of companies use Agile. How many of those companies consistently hit their original launch dates? How many CTOs actually sleep well at night, knowing exactly when their project will land?
Well, the definition of launch date often changes in Agile, and that's the point. We ship what's ready. This is the DevOps philosophy, the end of the finish line. I mean, if Netflix deploys code 50 times a day, there is no project end date. There is just a continuous flow of value. The whole concept of late disappears because you are always arriving.
That works for sustaining a live product. It does not work for creating a new one. If Apple is launching the new iPhone, they can't say, well, the software isn't ready, so we'll just iterate in production. No, the hardware is shipping, the date is fixed. If you are a startup running out of cash in 6 months, you can't just continuously flow value. You need to launch the product before you die.
So let's talk about a middle ground, because I think we are creating a false dichotomy here. The source material brings up a case study that I think bridges this gap perfectly. It involved a major software platform used by global corporations. They were fully agile, stand-ups, backlogs, the works. And they were failing.
They were failing because they had zero credibility. They kept promising features and missing the dates. The customers were furious. The internal teams were completely burnt out because they were just sprinting endlessly without a finish line.
So what did they do? They didn't scrap Agile. They didn't go back to writing 400-page specs.
No, they injected FTTM right into it. They took their backlog, hundreds of user stories, and they didn't just prioritize them by value, they mapped them out against time. They asked, if we do story A, does it block story B? They built a logic network.
And what did they find?
They found the invisible gap. They realized that based on their current velocity and dependencies, they were going to be 6 months late. Agile hadn't shown them that. The burndown chart looked fine because they were completing tasks, but they were completing the wrong tasks relative to the critical path.
And this is where the decision accelerator concept comes in, right? This is an idea I love. Once they saw the gap, they didn't just work harder. You can't just sprint faster to make up 6 months.
Exactly. Work harder is not a strategy, it's a prayer. They used the data to make ruthless trade-offs. They looked at the critical path and said, this feature is blocking the release. Do we need it? If the answer was no, they cut it. If the answer was yes, they moved resources to it. They prioritized based on time, not just coolness.
And the result?
They hit the date. They restored trust. And interestingly, the team morale actually went up because people like knowing where the finish line is.
What strikes me about that case study is that it sounds like Agile. The manifesto says customer collaboration, responding to change. If you realize you're 6 months late, the most agile thing you can do is cut scope to hit the window.
I agree, but you can only make that decision if you know you are late. My argument is that modern Agile tools, the cult, they hide the bad news until it's too late to fix it. FTTM turns the lights on. It forces you to look at the ugly truth of the schedule 6 months in advance.
So FTTM provides the headlights. Agile provides the steering wheel.
That's a decent analogy. Creativity loves constraints. If you tell an engineer, you have infinite time, just put it in the next bucket. They will gold plate that code forever. They will refactor it 3 times. If you tell them the train leaves on November 1st and you are currently blocking the tracks, they get incredibly creative about solving the problem simply. They stop messing around and they build what is necessary.
This circles back to the human element. Agile principle number 5. Build a project around motivated individuals. You're arguing that a deadline, a real scientifically calculated deadline, is actually a motivator.
It's the ultimate motivator, but it has to be real. It can't be a manager just shouting a date based on a desire. It has to be derived from the work itself. That's the difference between crunch time, which just kills people, and critical path management, which focuses people.
I think this is where the synthesis really lies. The early 2000s were about breaking the shackles of bureaucracy. That was necessary. We needed to stop writing documents and start writing code. But now, in the mid-2020s, we're seeing a correction. We realize that while we enjoy the freedom, we miss the predictability. We need that chief engineer mindset back. We need someone who sees the whole picture, not just the sprint board.
We need to recover the macro view. You can't navigate a ship by only looking at the waves hitting the hull. You have to look at the horizon.
But, and I have to insist on this, we cannot lose the culture of trust. If reintroducing the critical path means we go back to managers using the schedule as a weapon to beat developers, we've failed. The schedule has to serve the team, not the other way around. The team has to own the path.
I'll accept that condition. The schedule is a map, not a whip. But you wouldn't drive into the wilderness without a map, and right now, I see a lot of Agile teams driving in circles, burning gas, celebrating their velocity, but getting nowhere.
So for the listeners, whether you are a project manager, a developer, or VP, here's the challenge. Look at your current project. Do you know the date?
Not the date you hope for, not the date you put in the PowerPoint for the board, the date the data says you'll finish. Do you see the gap?
And if you don't, maybe it's time to stop just filling buckets. Maybe it's time to pull the team together and map out the dependencies. It might be scary to see that gap for the first time.
It will be terrifying. You'll probably find out you're late.
But finding out you're late today gives you options. Finding out you're late on launch day just gives you excuses.
Precisely. Because whether you call it Agile, FTM, or just common sense, hitting the market window is the only thing that keeps the lights on.
On that note, we'll wrap up. It's not about choosing sides, it's about choosing the right tool for the job. Thanks for listening to the debate.
Keep your eyes on the critical path.